Good evening. There were many topics I could have come and talked to you about today. I could have told you of how I jumped off a plane when it was 3,000 feet in the air and in flames. Or I could have told you about the lack of job opportunities in our modern day economy. But that's not me. I'm a simple man with a boring life. I'm here to tell you about the center of my universe, the source of my stress, the enemy I stare at daily, loved by few and hated by most. I'm here to talk about school and why it sucks. You see, we always describe our educational system as being flawed. We praise Finland's system and look down upon ours. But what really is wrong with our educational system? Well, for starters, schools think that education is a finite process, one that begins 8 in the morning and ends 3 in the afternoon, one that begins in August and ends in June, one that begins in kindergarten and ends at graduation day, but their beliefs are wrong. Education is an infinite process, one with no beginning and no end, one that will stand by us from the moment that we are born to the moment that we lay in our graves. Another thing the schools get wrong is that they teach us many things we will never use in our lives and neglect to teach fundamental subjects. I mean, I look at my course selection sheet and I see a course for calculus, but no course on how to maintain a credit card, manage a budget, or pay taxes. Most of us have the quadratic formula memorized, but have a hard time splitting the bill with friends. We can take chemistry, but they won't teach me how to read different nutrition labels on different products. I was never taught how to limit my sodium intake. They will teach me how to find the electron configuration of every element in the periodic table, when most of us can't cook one dish. In biology, they tell us how DNA replicates, but they don't teach us basic CPR or first aid. We can take physics, but they won't tell me how to repair a car. They'll tell me how to find the horizontal and vertical velocities of different objects in motion, when most of us can't change a light bulb. They don't tell us how our local government works, how to be safe on social media, how to negotiate on a day-to-day basis. I mean, they tell me to pick my courses, send me to university, but fail to tell me how to get a job. Now, the question on everyone's mind right now is why? Why would such a flawed system exist? Why would anyone want to hinder a child's education? Well, in order to answer that question, we'll have to look at the history of education. You see, we started out as hunters and gatherers, and the only form of education we had at the time was from a tribe's leader who was considered the wisest to pass information to us. But then the agricultural revolution hit, and we started settling into villages that grew into cities, that grew into civilizations, and we had time in our hands to specialize in different jobs. But how can we possibly learn all these jobs? The answer is apprenticeship. You see, it's quite a simple system. If a child wants to become a blacksmith, he or she would work under a blacksmith to learn the art of bending steel. It allowed us to specialize in different jobs, and it allowed for job security for the majority of the population. But then another revolution hit, the Industrial Revolution. It was a time where products were becoming mass-produced, where factories were spreading all over nations. And the factory owners needed factory workers. So they decided that they need to build institutions that will kill children's creativity and make sure that they just follow basic instructions. These institutions will need to limit the amount of subject material a student learns, no matter what they specialize in. In these institutions, a child only needs 50% to pass a grade. And as Sal Khan explains in his book, The One World Schoolhouse, he describes this as Swiss cheese learning. Because if a child only needs 50% to pass a grade, that leaves 50% of the material that they don't understand. And soon these holes will catch up to them, and they won't understand anything. These institutions spread all over nations. These institutions were called schools. And don't get me wrong, they served their purpose at the time. They were free, the middle class grew, the factory owners got their factory workers, but then another revolution hit, the technological revolution. It was a time that the answer to the most complicated mathematical problems we face in our everyday lives can be found from the calculators we carry with us. A time where the answer to any question that comes into our minds can be found from a simple Google search. A time where people are left jobless because they cannot think outside the scope of their curriculum. We are living through this time, but we have adapted the education system of the past. I mean, let me read you a quote from the 1800s about the educational system. The teacher would use a large chalkboard to explain things to the class in one go, and the students would use smaller boards to record what they see and hear. Sounds familiar to what I face every day when I come to school, except that large chalkboard we call today a smart board. And those smaller boards are the notebooks I carry in my backpack. We have not adapted to a new education system, and I know the flaws of the educational system. I used to think that if anyone studies hard, anyone can be smart. But as Albert Einstein says, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it's stupid. And I can relate to this from something that happened a while ago. You see, I overheard these kids talking, and one of them said, "I can never seem to get good grades. Life isn't fair." And I couldn't handle it, so I interrupted and said, "Why are you complaining? All you gotta do is study. It's simple." And to this day, I regret the words I uttered, because today, I realize that that kid was just a fish that I judged by his ability to climb a tree. How many of you here today can relate to that fish? We cannot put future engineers, future doctors, future athletes, and future artists with different hopes and dreams, with different gifts and passions, with different strengths and weaknesses in one room and force a single curriculum on them. Schools are not only not educating us, but they are harming us. They're crushing our motivation. They're killing our creativity. They're causing lack of sleep, stress, and piles of work over our head. Most kids are cracking. Most kids are dropping out of school. And for the very few valedictorians out there with perfect GPAs, they don't have time for social life, no time for family and friends, no time for creativity and extracurricular activities, and no time to just enjoy life. And now that we understand the flaws in our education system, what can we as individuals do? Don't get too excited. My purpose today is not to incite you to drop out of school. Schools may not necessarily educate us, but they still serve two purposes. They help us make friends and connections that we will need in the future, and they give us a degree which may or may not get us to a university, which may or may not get us a job, which may or may not put a roof over our heads, but it's the best bet we have today. So what's my purpose today? You need to become aware of the flaws in our educational system. You need to understand that just because you go to school does not mean you're smart, does not mean you're educated, and just because you have high grades does not mean you're intellectual, and just because you have a low GPA does not mean you're incapable. We need to educate ourselves through other means than school. The solution? Stay in school, but also do what you're passionate on. Do what drives your motivation. Try new extracurricular activities, pick up a new musical instrument, travel the world, open your mind to new perspectives, and just remember that whatever they don't teach you in your syllabus, whatever you don't understand, it can all be found in here. Thank you.